The fog of the early morning of October 12, 1943, over the floodplain of the Mereya River was so dense that it seemed as if it could be cut with a heavy officer's dirk. In the lowlands, where units of the 1st Polish Infantry Division, named after Tadeusz Kosciuszko, lay in wait, there was not only the smell of damp autumn leaves and the moisture of the marshy soil, but also the sharp, acrid smell of burning from smoldering fires that the soldiers tried to light secretly from German observers to at least slightly warm their numb fingers. If you look at the footage of the official Chronicle of that time, you will see inspired faces, solemn oaths, and a measured step across the parade ground in Sielce. But I invite you to look closely at the details that usually remain behind the scenes of ceremonial reports. On Colonel Zygmunt Berling's wrist in that pre-dawn hour, a Swiss Longines watch ticked steadily, counting down the last seconds until the start of an operation that would forever change the landscape of Polish national memory. His fingers, clutching a worn leather map case, trembled noticeably. And it was not at all due to the morning chill, but to the chilling realization that behind him stood 12,000 men, for most of whom this dawn would be the last bright impression of their lives. We are used to perceiving the Battle of Lenino as an immutable symbol of an unbreakable brotherhood in arms, born in the fire of battles. But today we will conduct a detailed, almost surgical audit of this clash. We will analyze why the 1st Polish Division found itself in a situation that, from the point of view of military science, can only be called a trap. This is an investigation into how high geopolitics and intelligence negligence turned a military operation into a tragic and bloody act of political theater. Before we plunge into the abyss of this confrontation, I ask you to support our project. Your subscription, a like under this material, and your active participation in the discussion help us find and analyze the most hidden, dusty pages of history, restoring justice where it has been tried to be erased for decades by official, sanitized propaganda. To fully comprehend the tragedy at Lenino, it is necessary to restore the context of the time when the fate of future post-war Europe was being decided in the diplomatic offices of the Kremlin. After the break in relations between the Soviet Union and the Polish government in London due to the discovery of graves in Katyn, Joseph Stalin desperately needed a loyal, fully controlled Polish political and military force. Here we encounter the classic archetype of the sacrificial lamb. The formation of the division in camps near Ryazan proceeded at a feverish, almost frantic pace. Most of the recruits were people with difficult fates, who only yesterday were in places of detention or special settlements in the depths of Siberia and Kazakhstan. They were given new uniforms, sewn in the Polish style, but with one significant detail. The crown above the eagle disappeared from their caps. This was a symbol of a new People's Poland, which was to be born not in London, but here, in the fields of Belarus. The archetype of returning home through redemption by blood was actively exploited by propagandists such as Wanda Wasilewska, whose fervent speeches echoed from loudspeakers in training camps. But few of the soldiers understood that their way home lay through one of the most fortified zones of German defense, the positions of the Wehrmacht's 337th Infantry Division. Historians often debate whether the haste to commit the division to battle was justified by operational necessity. But I propose we look at the logistics and diplomatic calendar of that autumn. The Tehran Conference loomed ahead, and the Soviet leader needed irrefutable, weighty evidence in the form of Polish blood shed in joint combat with the Red Army. It is here that we encounter the first major point of our serious doubt regarding the official version of events. It was claimed that the division was fully staffed, trained, and ready for offensive operations in conditions of modern warfare. However, archival documents from the 33rd Army headquarters reveal a catastrophic situation. There was a lack of basic communication equipment. Liaison officers did not possess sufficient Russian language skills to coordinate with neighboring units, and interaction with supporting tank units existed only on paper. Soldiers, many of whom suffered from the effects of dystrophy after the camps, received brand new Spagen submachine guns and Mosin rifles, but had only a few weeks of fire training behind them. The external context of the conflict, at first glance, seems typical for offensive operations of 1943. Soviet command planned a powerful strike in the Mogilev direction, and the Polish division was to be its steel ram, breaching the German eastern wall. The geography of the location was against the attackers. The Mereya River, small and unremarkable on maps, had turned into a treacherous obstacle with swampy, viscous banks due to prolonged autumn rains. The Germans, meanwhile, occupied ideal positions on dominating heights, with elevations of 215.7 and 217.9. Few notice that at this critical moment, the intelligence of the 33rd Army made a miscalculation that, in any other situation, would have been considered criminal. They not only underestimated the enemy's firepower, they virtually ignored the fact that fresh reserves had arrived in this sector, and that the Germans had established a deeply echeloned system of crossfire. The fatal error, which predetermined the scale of future losses, lay in carrying out the so-called reconnaissance in force on the morning of October 11th, exactly 24 hours before the main assault. This decision by Front Commander General Vasily Sokolowski still raises many uncomfortable questions among military analysts. Why reveal one's positions, strength, and direction of the main strike 24 hours before the attack? As a result of this clumsy attempt to probe the defenses, the Germans not only finally ascertained exactly where the strike would be delivered, but also had time to range every square meter of the river floodplain to the inch. When the Polish battalions went into their first trial of strength on October 11th, they ran into a wall of lead. Instead of drawing conclusions and adjusting the plan, the Soviet command merely confirmed the order: attack on October 12th at 8:20 a.m. The internal conflict within the headquarters during these hours reached a boiling point. Zygmunt Berling, a man of complex and in many ways tragic fate, was perfectly aware that his reputation, political future, and very life were at stake. From a psychological analysis perspective, he was in a classic state of cognitive dissonance. As a seasoned professional soldier, he saw the blatant absurdity of many Army headquarters orders. But as a political appointee, whose status hung by a thread, he dared not contradict directives from above. In his headquarters, housed in a cramped peasant house, there was a heavy smell of makhorka and unspoken tension. The archetype of the tragic hero, caught between the hammer of Stalin's will and the anvil of German defense, is fully manifested here. On one hand, a personal promise to Stalin to demonstrate the power of Polish weaponry; on the other, the sight of the emaciated faces of his soldiers, who had not yet had time to get used to their new greatcoats. The ideological clash here reaches its climax. The concept of a noble liberation campaign collides with the icy, mathematical cynicism of the war machine, where an individual national division was regarded merely as a convenient statistical unit in a large-scale frontal operation plan. The fateful morning of October 12th arrived. At 6:55, the silence was shattered by the roar of hundreds of cannons. The artillery preparation had begun. It seemed as if the ground beneath their feet had turned into a living, groaning creature. But here is a second point that makes us deeply doubt the official version of brilliant preparation. Why was the Soviet artillery fire suddenly ceased much earlier than scheduled? Official reports later explained this by a dense fog, which supposedly prevented spotters from seeing the results of hits. But there is another, harsher version. Due to poor logistics and muddy roads, ammunition was simply expended prematurely, and the infantry was driven forward so as not to disrupt the rigid offensive schedule approved in Moscow. At 8:20, when the echo of the last salvo still trembled in the air, Polish regiments rose from the wet trenches. Visually, it was majestic and terrifying at the same time. Thousands of people in gray-green greatcoats shouting, "For a free Poland!" and "Forward to Warsaw!" rushed into the icy waters of the Mereya. The water temperature in the river at that hour did not exceed 5 degrees Celsius, and the bottom was a viscous, sucking mire. Soldiers burdened with ammunition, rolled-up gear, and heavy rifles sank up to their waists, becoming easy prey for German machine gunners. Few of those who survived that day forgot the sound of German MG-42 machine guns, which operated almost without interruption, turning the river floodplain into a zone of total annihilation. In the midst of this chaos, an event occurred that finally predetermined the tragic outcome of the day. German aviation, practically unopposed by Soviet fighters, began methodically and with impunity to destroy the crossing units. We see here a paradox bordering on sabotage. Having overwhelming numerical air superiority on paper, the Soviet command was unable or unwilling to provide elementary cover for the Polish battalions. Why? The answer most likely lies in the chronic confusion of command at the junction of the two armies. Each aviation regiment was responsible for its narrow sector, and the Polish division, due to its specific nature, found itself in a peculiar gray zone of responsibility, where no one was in a hurry to come to its aid at the cost of their own equipment. By 10 o'clock in the morning, against all logic of war and monstrous fire, Polish soldiers, through sheer heroism and desperation, managed to cling to the first line of German trenches and even break into the outskirts of the village of Polzuki. This was a moment of triumph that could have been the beginning of a breakthrough. But this success was ephemeral and temporary. Without the support of Valentine tanks, which were hopelessly stuck in the swampy banks of the Mereya, and without a dense artillery umbrella, the infantry turned into ideal targets on the open slopes of the heights. Here I want to ask you a question. What would you do in the place of a young lieutenant, a company commander, who sees his men dying not only from enemy fire, but also from the explosions of shells from their own batteries, which are trying to help, but due to lack of communication and coordination, are hitting their own positions? Write in the comments what, in your opinion, is more important in such a stalemate: impeccable execution of orders at any cost, or an attempt to save the lives of the remnants of the unit in violation of a direct directive from command. Your reflections will help us better understand the psychology of a person caught in the millstones of inhumane circumstances. The third critical point of our doubt concerns the actions of the neighboring Soviet divisions, the 42nd and the 299th. Post-war official reports indicated that they actively supported the flanks of the Polish units. However, testimonies of direct participants and diary entries of liaison officers paint a fundamentally different picture. The neighboring units advanced extremely slowly, often stopping after the first losses, which left the flanks of the Kosciuszko Division completely exposed. This created a situation in which the Polish regiments found themselves in a peculiar fire pocket, surrounded on three sides. The Germans immediately exploited this tactical advantage. By noon, they launched a powerful counterattack with tank groups and elite units transferred from other sectors of the front. In Berling's Stab, headquarters, utter chaos reigned during these minutes. Communication wires were cut, radio stations failed, and messengers one after another disappeared in the smoke and flames of explosions. Here, my subjective assessment as a military analyst is unequivocal. This was not an organized battle, but a disorganized massacre caused by the absence of a unified operational language and trust between allies. By 1300 hours, the situation on the battlefield became truly critical. The sky over Lenino finally cleared of the morning haze, and German Junkers dive bombers began their incessant runs on the Polish positions. The psychological portrait of an ordinary soldier at that moment was a volatile mix of fatalism and mounting rage. Many of them began to realize that they had effectively been sacrificed for the sake of grand politics. But it was precisely during these hours that a myth was born, which would later be canonized by both sides. People fought with the desperation of the doomed, holding Hill 215.7 for several hours of continuous hand-to-hand combat. Mud mixed with blood, the smell of gunpowder, and the cold clang of metal. This was the reality of Lenino, infinitely far from the glossy propaganda posters. By the evening of October 12th, the division had lost more than 25% of its personnel. These are colossal figures for a single day of fighting, comparable to losses in the bloodiest operations of the First World War. The transformation of the perception of this event at the top occurred instantly, even before the last shots died down. While burial teams were collecting the bodies of the fallen in the craters near Mereya, in Moscow, the propaganda machine was already in full swing, composing victorious reports. On October 13th, attacks resumed by order from Army headquarters, but they no longer had any operational or strategic meaning. This was an inertial mechanical movement of a huge mass of people, directed by an iron will located hundreds of kilometers from the front line. On this day, an event occurred that official historiography painstakingly ignored for decades. Entire groups of Polish soldiers, driven to despair by the lack of support and the senselessness of orders, began to defect to the enemy. This was not sympathy for Nazi ideology. It was a manifestation of profound disillusionment and a sharp sense of betrayal by the Soviet leadership. This psychological breakdown nearly put an end to the entire ambitious project of creating a pro-Soviet Polish army. The final culmination arrived on October 14th, when the considerably thinned, exhausted remnants of the division were finally withdrawn to the second echelon. The results of this three-day drama were disheartening. Over 3,000 men were out of action, of whom about 500 permanently ended their lives in Belarusian soil. The village of Lenino never became the triumphant springboard for the rapid liberation of the Republic that the front headquarters had hoped for. The offensive effectively stalled, failing to achieve a single significant objective. However, the main political outcome was achieved at any cost. Joseph Stalin could now present to the world community and the allies of the anti-Hitler coalition an undeniable fact. Polish soldiers were fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Red Army under a unified command. The price of this bloody demonstration was thousands of cut-short lives of young men whose dreams of returning to a free Poland were mercilessly crushed by the treads of German tanks and the icy indifference of their own and allied generals. Analyzing this outcome, I see not just a military failure or a technical glitch, but a conscious and cynical use of human resources as expendable material in a grand game for influence in the post-war world. The resonance of the Battle of Lenino continues to be felt to this day, decades after those events concluded. For one part of society, it is a symbol of the eternal, unyielding feat of the common soldier. For another, it is irrefutable proof of the boundless cynicism of an empire willing to sacrifice entire peoples for its own interests. The lessons of Lenino clearly tell us that when grand politics begins to dictate its terms to military professionals on the battlefield, it inevitably leads to unjustified, catastrophic losses. In modern Polish historical science, Lenino is viewed as a deeply tragic page, where genuine heroism and self-sacrifice of ordinary soldiers coexisted with the short-sightedness and betrayal of political elites. We see how historical memory becomes another battlefield, where dry facts are often replaced by ideologized emotions. But the true, profound meaning of this battle lies in the eternal reminder of the fragility of every individual human life in the face of large-scale geopolitical ambitions. Concluding our deep audit today, let us mentally return to that very Mereya River. Today it is a quiet, willow-overgrown stream, in whose mirrored surface the peaceful Belarusian sky is reflected. It is difficult to even imagine that 83 years ago, its water was literally brown with the blood of thousands of people. We began our story with fog and deep doubts, and with them we are forced to end. Was this battle historically inevitable? Could the Soviet command and Colonel Berling personally have acted differently, saving their men? The logic of military affairs suggests that with proper planning, honest intelligence, and the presence of real, not just paper, interaction, losses could have been significantly less. But history, as we know, does not tolerate the subjunctive mood. It leaves us only the right to an impartial audit and honest remembrance. The Battle of Lenino is an eternal, unhealing question to the conscience of those who make fateful decisions in the quiet of their offices, sending others into the deafening roar and chaos of battles. Remember this every time you next hear pompous speeches about necessary sacrifices for the achievement of great historical goals. Thank you very much for watching this detailed analysis to the end. Your attention and desire to get to the bottom of the truth are the best tribute to those who forever remained on the steep banks of the Mereya on that cold October day of '43. Until new meetings in the labyrinths of grand history, where we will continue together to seek the truth hidden behind the facade of official myths.